Universal Studios Hollywood's Halloween Horror Nights. Will there be chills and horrors? Oh yes. Will there be a glimpse of things to come this Halloween? Of course. Will there be a major reveal? You can bet your life on it. Here's the man with the sinister plan.
Yeah!
I should have filmed that for my kids. Let me start with this, okay? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. For anybody who does what we do with Halloween Horror Nights, everybody who works on this event, all the talented men and women, if there's one thing we know is that we are extremely lucky and extremely privileged to be able to do what we do and create what we create for all of you, because without you, I would probably be operating a puppet show somewhere in Dublin, on Grafton Street. Everything we do, all the passion and the work we put into this event, it's all for you guys. So thank you for all your support, year after year after year, after year 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 after year. This is 17 years for me now. 18 if you count 2020, which I do. We built it. By the pricking of my thumbs, something wicked this way comes. How about an announcement right out of the gate? I have to ask you guys, did we announce anything when I was in the air? Because I was on a plane flight for like 11 hours. Did anything happen Friday?
Like everything.
3 mazes on the same day? How about another one? But first, original Latin American themed horror content of Halloween Horror Nights, right? This actually goes all the way back to 2010. That was the first year we did La Llorona as a scare zone. And then, of course, we had the La Llorona mazes 2011, 2012, 2013. We teamed up with Danny Trejo to do El Cucuy.
Yeah.
And then kind of the second phase began. We started working with Latin American film directors. It started with Robert Rodriguez on his TV series From Dusk Till Dawn. And then Guillermo del Toro, doing Crimson Peak, and then 7 years. 7 years went by where we didn't really do that. We moved on to other things, we started doing other opportunities, and then coming out of 2021, I noticed the plaza, the Universal Plaza, the way we themed that around Day of the Dead, and I noticed everybody inside it, something in my brain just clicked that year, and I went, we gotta get back to this. This is what we should be doing. And so, last year, we brought back La Llorona, the Weeping Woman. So it feels like it's time for something else. The legends and myths of Latin America at Halloween Horror Nights continues with Monstruos, the monsters of Latin America. Study this real well, there's going to be a quiz at the end, okay? So what is this? This is an all-new haunted house that features 3 infamous monsters, or monstruos, which is Spanish for monsters, of Latin America. What's wrong with this picture? Somebody really screwed up. I'm going to explain that in just a second. Let's meet the Monstruos. We'll start with our first one, and this is, I'll give anybody a penny if you can pronounce this name. Anybody? Talalhupuchi. This is a character that comes from the Tlaxcala region of Mexico, and it's really interesting because it's a witch, but it's also a vampire. And with any of these Latin American myths and legends, they're all passed down orally for hundreds of years. In fact, Tlahuelpuchi, some people think the origins of the story go back to Aztec times. That's how old it is. But I'll give you the version that's the most common version, right? Because there are variations to the story. But in the most common version, anybody can be a Tlahuelpuchi. It could be you, it could be you, it could be you. You don't know when you're a little kid that you're a Tlahuelpuchi until you reach like puberty. And then things start to change, yes they do. And you become aware that you are in fact a Tlahuelpuchi. So a Tlahuelpuchi has to do a very, very specific ceremony, and then it transforms into one of a series of animals. But the most common one is a turkey vulture. And it flies to the house of its victim, and it sucks the blood out of them. It doesn't bite them like a vampire. It sucks the blood through the skin, and it leaves these telltale bruises and markings. So Tlahuelpuchi is the first of our monsters. And I'll give you a little facts as we go along. It came out of the research we did on this house. As late as the 1950s, there was a particular doctor in Mexico who was trying to figure out why the infant mortality rates were so high in this particular region where this story originates. And he pulled all these death certificates, and he was doing his research and he was studying, and he noticed that cause of death, all the parents were writing on it, Tlahuelpuchi, or witch. So that's what first brought this story to larger attention. Let's meet our next one. Actually, let's take a look at the character design for Tlahuelpuchi. Or pale skin, that's a brand new Tlahuelpuchi, just started feeding. The one you see in the red, that's a Tlahuelpuchi that's been around for a while and has ingested a lot of blood. And I should say there are male Tlahuelpuchis and there are female Tlahuelpuchis. But we're going with the female Tlahuelpuchis because they are stronger than the males. Girl dad. Our next monster is La Lechuza. Some of you were right on the internet. Some of you, I think they're doing La Lechuza. I have no idea how you got that, but you were right. La Lechuza, also known as the Owl Witch, okay? And this comes from all over Mexico, but it also comes from the southwestern United States, particularly Texas. And I'll give you again the most common iteration of this story. There's an old woman who lives in a village. She's the kind of old woman that people whisper about, and people become convinced that she's a witch, so they put her to death. But she comes back as La Lechuza. So she's a combination old woman and a witch. And there's one particular thing the La Lechuza does that's extremely creepy. And again, you can go on the internet and read all about this. There's endless Reddit pages about people's encounters with La Lechuzas. But one thing that it does is late at night, if you're in your house and you hear a baby crying, don't go outside. Monstro fact. In 1975, a town in South Texas, and this is documented in the press, was terrorized by La Lechuza. People started seeing it, they saw it flying overhead, they started calling into their local radio stations. There's even actually a song written about this that was released called La Lechuza. We're not using it in the house because it's kind of silly. But it was a huge big deal. And this is what they eventually found. Two boys made this and stuck it up in a tree, and they kept moving it around into different trees. And this is a picture from the local newspaper when the police finally figured out what was going on. Best prank ever. I need to hire those two kids for Horror Nights. Because we did stuff like that when we were kids. Did you guys do stuff like this? We used to rig dummies through a tree and make it so somebody would be walking down the street late at night and it would just suddenly stand up right in front of them. Don't do that, by the way. I remember being chased through a field by somebody when I was a kid. But the weird thing about this story is, okay, so they saw it in a tree. It doesn't explain why so many people saw it flying overhead, and they described it as this huge bird. So monsters are real. La Lechuza? And that brings us to our third and possibly last monster, and that is El Silban. I bet you didn't figure this one out, right? Nobody? Okay. El Saban, which translates to the Whistler, is from the Los Llanos region of Colombia, Venezuela, and it's another great story. Different iterations of the story, I'll give you the most common one. So there's a boy, which is really like a late teenager boy, living on a farm, fairly well off. He falls in love with a woman that the father does not approve of. The father tells him, get rid of this woman, but he's in love and he doesn't get rid of him. So one day the father comes into the barn and he catches the boy and the girl, and he flies into a rage and he murders the girl, kills her right in front of the son. The son flies into a rage and murders his father. And then granddad comes home, sees what's been done, and he takes the boy out to the field, ties him to a post, whips him repeatedly with a whip until the flesh falls off his back. Then he takes like limes and like tequila and pours it in the wounds. And if that wasn't bad enough, then he sets wild dogs upon him that rip him to shreds. And as this horribly mutilated guy is stumbling towards the woods, the grandfather comes up to him and hands him the sack of his father's bones, his murdered father's bones, and says, you are condemned for all time to carry the bones of your murdered father on your back. And he disappears into the woods, and he's not seen again. And then eventually this creature comes out of the woods that is now known as El Saban. And it's a towering creature. Some say he's like 10, 12 feet tall. Really, really skinny, carrying the bones of his murdered father on his back. And he's known for his distinctive whistle that kind of rises and falls. If you hear this whistle and it sounds far away, that means El Saban is actually really close. But if you hear the whistle and it sounds close, that actually means he's far away. So we'll give you a Monstro fact about El Saban. Aside from the distinctive whistle that gives him his name, he is said to prey primarily on womanizers, and drunks. All right, let's take a look at our design for El Saban. So obviously we're doing him as a still walker in key scenes. Thinking about where to set this particular house, being that it's a new original house, we wanted to create a really iconic place to kind of ground the house in. So I started doing research. I did endless research, pulled hundreds and hundreds of images, but these two images in particular really stuck with me, and this is really what Brandy and Chris really latched onto as well. They're graveyards in Mexico. One's from Guadalajara, one's from Guanajuato. But I really liked, in the long kind of rectangular image, that Gothic Mexican architecture of that mausoleum. We thought that was a really cool element. And then the other one that I really liked was the idea of these sealed crypts that you see in the other image. So we created this place that we call the Cemetery of the Lost. And the idea here is that this is the place where every one of the victims of these monsters are buried. And it is a forsaken, condemned place that you do not go at night because the weather is always bad. It's always thunder and lightning here. Once your relatives are buried there, you never go back to visit them. This is just where they live. This is the elevation, the color elevation for the facade. You know, it's funny. I see what you guys say a lot of times, you know, on Twitter and whatnot. And I saw this one guy and he goes, I think that's a mausoleum, right? And this other guy goes, that's impossible! There's no such thing as a two-story mausoleum. Two-story mausoleum. And if you could peek over the fence right now, this is what you'd see. This is the mausoleum being built right now. This was taken about a week ago. We're just getting into the vine work. But if you look in the front, it looks kind of empty. And it's not going to be empty. There's a lot more coming. This is another piece of inspiration. I love these mourning statues that we found in these cemeteries in Guanajuato, and thought that was a really cool element. So I'm going to give you like the down view. This is the ground plan looking down, and that's a side elevation of the facade. You see the big, like above ground crypt with the statue, but you see something else. And this is going to get back to that piece of key art at the beginning. You see the guy standing there holding the shovel? Okay. We thought it would be cool to create our own original character to add to this mix. And this character would be like the narrator of the experience. He is the caretaker of the cemetery, and when we were trying to conceive what he should look like, we were really thinking about like traditional looks for the Grim Reaper. So I pulled all this research. These are just a few of the images. Does anybody know what the photograph is? And don't say Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. Does anybody know who that actor is? Very famous in a very famous horror movie. Max von Sydow, who plays the priest in The Exorcist. This is Max von Sydow back in the 1950s in a foreign film called The Seventh Seal, where he plays death. So we pulled that image. Then we pulled images from Aztec culture. We pulled images from the Middle Ages. We pulled images from the Renaissance, all different iterations of death, put it into our mind blender, and then came up with this. So this guy actually doesn't have a name. We never like officially named him. In our mind, it's kind of like those Clint Eastwood spaghetti westerns. You know, like he's always the man with no name who comes to the town, and you never know what his real name is. So he's kind of our man with no name. But we were thinking, Chris and I, when we were working on this, we're like, well, that's just going to get annoying after a while. We're going to be in meetings, and they're like, okay, we're talking about wardrobe for the man with no name, and we'd have to say that over and over and over again. So we just call him Muerte, which is Spanish for death. And he is going to be the guy you meet out in front. He's the pre-show, if you will, for this haunted house. He's going to be telling you the story about these three monsters. And he's designed with an articulated jaw so that the actor wearing the mask can lip sync to track. And you're going to see he's kind of the bookends of the haunted house as well. So when we came up with this idea for the cemetery, we thought, well, this is cool. This will be like the portal that you go through that transports you to all the world of these different monsters. So this is when you step through that crypt. Again, I want to point out, two-story. I just feel like I have to validate that guy, because he was right. He like nailed it right out of the gate. So you enter this two-story mausoleum, and there's all these rotting skeletons of all the people that are buried inside that you have to go through. And I kind of snuck a pic the other day. I like the guy in the middle. I'm just like, I'm obsessed with him now. I saw these pictures were coming in from the field, and I'm like, who's that guy? I'm going to call him Bruno. So we don't talk about Bruno. It's like, he's just like, and the guy behind him is just like, hey, let me see. You know, he's just like, no, Bruno has to look now. So this is the transition, and there's bats roosting in the upper niches, and there's animation and LED bat eyes, and as you go through this, you come to the first in a series of crypt paintings. And this is another thing we pulled from our research. This is an old Aztec tomb painting. But we thought it would be really cool if we used artwork, which is the same artwork you guys just saw in the key art, but did it in the style of like crypt paintings that would introduce you to each different area that you're going to. So this is the crypt painting for Tlalhupuchi. And then we also have crypt paintings for the other two monsters as well, La Lechuza and El Subon. And now we're going to get into their layers. So we'll start with Tlalhupuchi. And it all goes back to research. That's where all of this begins. So when I was doing research for Tlalhupuchi, I mentioned how she transforms into Tlalhupuchi, and the specifics of that, and it's very specific. She comes into her house, she sets a big roaring fire in the middle of the floor of the house. She has to use specific wood, specific spices, and then she has to walk back and forth over the fire in the shape of a cross multiple times, back and forth. And then when she's done with all of that, she sits on the fire and her legs detach. And then she starts to transform into a bird. So we thought, that's pretty cool. Chris felt really strongly that he wanted to give each of these environments like their own unique statement and their own unique twist. So Tlalhupuchi's lair has these big talon marks, scratches all over the walls, and it's just filled with bird cages. So there's birds everywhere. Infantes, or the infants, you start discovering these bassinets. Because one thing I didn't tell you about the Tlalhupuchi is she's very particular. She feeds on blood. And she'll drink anyone's blood if she's desperate enough, but she really, really prefers the blood of an infant. That's like the sweetest tasting blood. So there's all these bassinets, but they're all empty. And there's always a moment in Horror Nights, particularly with these houses. Last year with La Llorona, and going back to when we first did it, it was the scene across the river. You know? Yeah. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? when you get to the town and you have to cross the river and there's the kids floating in the water. But I have to tell you how we did that, because it's really weird. There's only like 2 inches of water, you know, and that's like pond liner. It's like how you make a koi pond in your backyard. So when we first did this, Chris and I were, and Tony, who's our prop master, we were like, what are we gonna do? How are we gonna float these kids? Well, we'll cut them in half. And now this is what I do with my children when they're misbehaving. Put that down, or you're gonna end up in daddy's maze. So this is a scene where you're walking towards another crypt painting of Talala Pucci and it disappears, and then you'll see. Let's talk about La Lechuza. So for La Lechuza's lair, again, it goes back to research, right? When I was doing research, and I have to wonder, like, there's gotta be somebody in IT by now that looks at my search history, you know, and it's just like, we got a problem. But one of the things I was researching is carnivorous birds' nests. Because there's one thing certain birds do that's really, really messed up. When they kill an animal that they're gonna eat, they use their bones to decorate their nest. They like adorn their nest with the bones of their victim. And I thought, that's awesome. La Lechuza's an owl. She's an owl witch. She must have a nest. So we built her a nest. So this is another color elevation of La Lechuza's realm, and you see all of those bones. So her nest is made out of all these found objects, sticks and twigs, and the bones of her victims. And I had to crop this picture too, because if I would have left the whole picture, you would have seen like Chucky, and you can't see that yet. That's a surprise. But these are the bodies that you see in the nest that Tony and his team had to create, and then you see the work they're doing to make these, you know, places where these victims' rotting corpses are being contained. All of that is done by hand. That's all done by our props and dressing team. So if you walked into this house and you just saw this giant La Lechuza like eating somebody in her nest. So this is a video when we were building the La Lechuza. It's like the T-1000 ectoskeleton for her. The cardboard is a severed, you know, arm/leg, and you can see it's taking a little bite, and its wings are unfurling. And I think in my treatment when I wrote it, it didn't have any of that. And they were just like, hey, we think we can do this, and they did it. And it's amazing. The only problem is I don't know how I'm gonna hide those 3 guys on set. I have to like throw a sheet over them or something. But they're doing amazing work, and we can't wait to share it with you. All right, El Salban. So now we've kind of been indoors for a long time. We want to break it up. We want to do a big outdoor scene. So for El Salban, we really wanted to take you to a village, because he typically comes and attacks people, you know, who are leaving a village on the crossroads late at night. So this goes back to research again. As I was doing research, I came across this, pulquerías. Does anybody know what that is? Or pulque? Yeah. To explain it in like, you know, American terms, like in the Wild West, this would be the equivalent of like a saloon. This would be a place you go for a drink, maybe some food, some dancing, some gambling, and probably a lot of fights, right? Pulque is an alcohol that's derived from cacti. What I loved about it is that's what it looks like in its pure state, right? It looks like foamy white milk. And I thought, if we combined blood, there was like blood running and foamy white pulque running together, that would be really disgusting. So we decided to create our own pulqueria. And then next door is the carniceria, the butcher shop. So as you head into this pulqueria, we have a scene called Pulqueria Massacre. And basically El Salban has come in and he's just killed every single person in this joint, particularly the womanizers and the drunks. I didn't mention how he kills them though. This is the tweaked part. If you're a drunk, he sucks the alcohol out of their body through their navel. Yeah. I was like, nah. But with womanizers, he rips them apart limb from limb, literally rips the bones bones out of their body and adds it to his sack that he has his father's bones in. So this is a dead body. I'm not kidding, it really is. It's not like it's in my closet or something. For the finale of this house, after you've gone through all these different layers, we wanted to do something really special. And again, it comes back to research. So I found this statue. This statue is in believe it or not, it's in, I believe, an Elsa Bon theme park. I want to go to this place. It's crazy, but it's this huge towering statue. But when I was looking at it, I thought, oh, that's cool. With the bones like spilling out of the sack. Because another thing Elsa Bon does is, let's say he's walking through your village late at night. He might stop in front of your house. He might sit down that giant sack of bones, and then one at a time, uno, dos, tres. He'll just sit there and count every single bone to make sure he has them all. So we thought, after Elsa Bon has gone through this village and killed like everybody in sight, his sack has got to be pretty big by this point. In fact, it's got to be enormous. And wouldn't it be cool if you had to go into that sack of bones? And what would you find there? I know it has hair, right? You can see it in the rendering. And I'm like, nobody's ever going to see the back of his head. But Patrick still has to put in all the details because that's the way he is. And then, whoa. Okay, I know that's the mask. I guess you'll have to wait and see. But wait, there's more! How about another announcement? All right, we're gonna mix it up into a Scare Zone announcement. Because when you come out of this house, we're gonna keep everything going with this theme and take you to a brand new Scare Zone called El Terror de las Momias. And this is all about inspiration. These are going to be used in the scenic, but they're also going to be used in the video that's part of the Scare Zone as well. So the idea is here that they made this movie, The Mummy That Couldn't Die, and it was a huge hit. And they were really excited to make a sequel. So they made The Mummy versus the Undead Skeletons in classic horror movie tradition. If it succeeds once, make 20 of them. And then they got around to make the third film. You get the joke? So this was not me, this was Pat. Pat's like, I want to call one of them Revenge of the Mummy, which is funny because I created a Revenge of the Mummy, you know, the ride in my previous life. Morte wasn't invited apparently, he's not in there. But this is all the work that Christina and her team does to produce these hundreds and hundreds of costumes for Horror Nights. What's next? What the heck is that? Project Eggplant. Note to self. Announcement delayed. Delete from deck prior to... Oh! Sorry. Time for another history lesson. Legacy of horror began. This is 1923. This is a photograph taken on the Universal lot in 1923. The studio, in the silent film era, undertook possibly the biggest production of its history up until that point. A production that required the construction of massive sets unlike anything they've ever seen built on the lot before, or frankly since, including a full-scale replica of a large section of the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris and an entire French village. When the cameras started rolling, the cast was so big that they had to invent the first PA system. That's what you see the director wearing the black hat standing next to, so that they could communicate with all of the crew members and all of the actors working on the production. The film starred Lon Chaney Sr., the man of 1,000 faces, as Quasimodo, and literally a cast of thousands. In this picture alone, there's 2,500 extras in this film. This is 1923. The film, of course, is The Hunchback of Notre Dame from 1923. And the reason why I'm talking about this and showing you all this is last year, around this time, I started thinking about, wow, next year's going to be the 100th anniversary of Hunchback. And it actually came out in the movie theaters September 6th. So like right when it's 100 years old, Horror Nights is gonna open, right? So it felt like we needed to pay tribute and homage to the films that started a franchise that we know today as the Universal Classic Monsters, right? Because without Hunchback, none of this would have ever happened. So, once upon a time in Paris.
Paris, the city of light. But underneath her bustling boulevards, her noisy cafes, silence is king, and darkness reigns.
60 feet beneath the city streets of Paris, there is an empire of the dead. The bones of 6 million Parisians are buried there in an underground catacomb. But something else is down there too. The Phantom of the Opera. Far beneath the Palace Garnier, better known as the Paris Opera House, in his underground lair, the Phantom is still down there, and he's not alone. There's someone else down there too. Quasimodo, the Hunchback of Notre Dame, has literally gone underground. Meanwhile, in London, the local authorities are searching for 2 doctors who are involved with unethical, illegal experiments. The first doctor is Dr. Jack Griffin, better known as the Invisible Man. The second doctor is Dr. Henry Jekyll, whose experiments have led him to embrace the darker side of his nature, known as Mr. Edward Hyde.
We dead welcome you to our world of shadow, knowing soon you will be one of us.
The Universal Monsters legacy at Halloween Horror Nights continues. This is the fifth Universal Monster House that we've done at Horror Nights in Hollywood. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde isn't a Universal Monster movie, au contraire. It is. We made a silent version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, like before the studio even came west and became Universal Studios Hollywood. It was what was called a 2-reeler in those days. 2 reels of film, 26 minutes long, silent film. So we thought we should bring Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and fold him into the Universal Monster family because he was literally the first monster we ever did at Universal. So again, this is an opportunity to do history as horror, which I personally love. And it's all based on real things that happened. This is an old 18th century illustration of a cemetery called the Cemetery of the Innocents in Paris. So back in those days, within the city confines of Paris, they were burying people in cemeteries, and then more people would die when you'd have things like the plagues, like the Black Death, the bubonic plague. A whole lot of people died. They just bury them and bury them and bury them and bury them, and they overburied people in the cemeteries inside Paris to the point that some really awful things happened. And these are true. You can actually look it up. I came across it in my research. Literally, imagine you're in a French cafe. I'll sit down for this. Imagine you're having dinner with your wife or your husband or your significant other. Is a giant-sized reproduction of an English language French newspaper. And where you see the blank spots, both on the facade where it's a different color and also on that graphic, that's where the illustrations that I just showed you go. It's a whole pre-show we're creating to help tell the story before you go inside. And again, people on the internet, this is a ticket booth. It's a ticket booth. It's not a ticket booth. It's a French newspaper stand. And sitting behind that is an animated skeleton figure that we call Madame Squelette. Squelette is French for skeleton. So we thought, oh, it'd be cool if one of the dead, one of the 6 million dead that are in these catacombs is actually telling you this story. So that's the voice you heard that I was playing earlier. She's narrating the story, setting it up for you. Lucas's artwork is changing on the newspaper, so we get to do a little bit of a pre-show before you go inside. Now, Madame Squillette also exists as a physical character, but when you're inside the catacombs, she's like back to her mortal state, a character we call the Rat Lady. And the idea is that this is a woman that's down in the catacombs, you know, scouring for any food she can find, so she's literally eating rats. And she has a very advanced case of, it just left my brain. Smallpox. Thank you. Well, smallpox. Advanced case of smallpox. So, and we just recently filmed her, because she also appears on video. And this is from that. This is like an hour-and-a-half long makeup. It's all prosthetic makeup. Let's talk about the music. For Universal Monsters Unmasked, it's a track called Silent Screams that features the work of Slash and Stacey Quinolti. Have a listen. You know, back in 2021, we're almost to the end here. Remember we did The Bride of Frankenstein Lives? People have been asking me, remember back in 2021, we had to all wear masks, we're still in that point. So, like, nobody ever got to see what The Bride of Frankenstein looked like. And people have been asking me on Twitter, and, you know, hey, can we see what The Bride of Frankenstein looked like? So, enjoy this. This is a time lapse that Pat McGee shot of The Bride of Frankenstein's makeup. So it was full prosthetic makeup to get that burned look. It's probably an hour in the chair, a little bit longer. And I was thinking, it's such a shame that nobody got to see that, right? Seems like you should get an opportunity to see that, doesn't it? We're going to do a little something. We've been doing more and more of what we call these character interactions, just like places where you can discover a character where you normally wouldn't find one. So keep your eyes peeled this year at Horror Nights. You might just run into the bride.